The little town of Harmony Creek was usually a peaceful place. Folks left their doors unlocked, kids played in the streets until dark, and the biggest excitement was Mrs. Gable's prize-winning pumpkin at the annual fall fair. But that all changed on a Tuesday morning when the First National Bank was robbed. It wasn't a violent robbery, thankfully. No one was hurt, but the robber got away with a lot of money. The whole town was shocked. Harmony Creek hadn't seen a crime like this in, well, ever. People started locking their doors, and the kids stayed closer to home. A shadow of worry fell over the usually cheerful town. The local police, led by the earnest but slightly overwhelmed Sheriff Brody, immediately started investigating. They talked to the bank tellers, looked for fingerprints, and searched for any clues the robber might have left behind. But the robber seemed to have vanished into thin air. The only real lead they had was from a surveillance camera across the street. The camera had captured a car speeding away from the bank shortly after the robbery. It was blurry and distant, but it was something. Sheriff Brody knew they had to find that car if they wanted to catch the robber and bring peace back to Harmony Creek. The people of Harmony Creek were scared. They whispered about the robbery at the grocery store and the diner. They wondered if the robber was still in town, hiding somewhere, waiting to strike again. Even Mrs. Gable's prize-winning pumpkin seemed to droop a little, reflecting the town's sadness. Sheriff Brody felt the pressure mounting. He knew he had to solve this case, not just to recover the stolen money, but to restore the town's sense of safety and security. He gathered his team and told them, "We're going to catch this robber, no matter what it takes. We owe it to the people of Harmony Creek." He looked at the blurry image of the getaway car. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. He knew it would take a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck to turn that blurry image into a solid lead. But Sheriff Brody was determined. He wouldn't let Harmony Creek down. He just needed to find something, anything, that would point them in the right direction. Something that would help them bring the robber to justice and bring the peace back to Harmony Creek. Sheriff Brody stared at the grainy image on the computer screen. The getaway car. It was the key, he knew it. But it was so frustratingly unclear. The car was a dark color, maybe blue or black, but the quality was so poor it was hard to tell for sure. The make and model were impossible to determine. It could have been any number of cars. He zoomed in, trying to sharpen the image, but it only made it more pixelated. He ran the image through every enhancement program they had, but nothing seemed to work. The car remained a blurry blob, mocking his efforts. "Anything, Deputy Johnson?" Sheriff Brody asked, his voice tight with frustration. Deputy Johnson shook his head. "Nothing, Sheriff. I've checked the license plate database, but there's nothing even close to what we can see in the picture. It's like the car doesn't even exist." Sheriff Brody sighed. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but he hadn't expected it to be this difficult. He walked over to the window and looked out at the town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. He thought about the people of Harmony Creek, their fear, and their lost sense of security. He couldn't let them down. He turned back to the computer screen, his eyes narrowed. He had to find something, anything, that could help them identify the car. He started going over the image again, pixel by pixel, searching for a detail he might have missed. He focused on the back of the car. The taillights were blurry, but he could make out their general shape. He noticed something on the driver's side taillight. It was a small, dark mark. He zoomed in as much as he could. It looked like a crack. "Johnson," he said, his voice suddenly sharp with excitement. "Take a look at this. The driver's side taillight. Does that look like a crack to you?" Deputy Johnson leaned in and examined the image closely. "I think you're right, Sheriff. It does look like a crack." Sheriff Brody felt a surge of hope. A cracked taillight. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something unique. Something that could potentially identify the car. "Okay, "Johnson," he said, his voice filled with renewed determination. "I want you to pull up every report of damaged vehicles in the county. Focus on cars with cracked taillights. Let's see if we can find a match." It was a long shot, he knew, but it was the best lead they had. And Sheriff Brody was ready to follow that lead, no matter where it took him. He was going to catch this robber, and he was going to bring peace back to Harmony Creek. The cracked taillight, blurry as it was, might just be the key. The bank's surveillance system wasn't state-of-the-art. It was an older model, more for show than for capturing crystal-clear images. Still, it was something. The camera across the street, mounted on the hardware store, offered a slightly better angle. That's where the blurry image of the getaway car came from. The camera had been triggered by motion. A car speeding away from the bank at precisely 10:17 a.m., just minutes after the robbery was reported. The timing was perfect, or rather, perfectly incriminating. The problem was the quality. The car zipped past the hardware store, a dark blur against the bright morning light. The camera struggled to focus, resulting in a grainy, distorted image. The car's features were smeared, making it nearly impossible to identify. It was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. Sheriff Brody had spent hours studying that footage. He'd watched it forwards, backwards, and in slow motion. He'd tried adjusting the brightness, the contrast, the sharpness, everything he could think of. But the car remained stubbornly blurry. The footage showed the car turning onto Elm Street, then disappearing out of frame. Elm Street led out of town, towards the highway. The robber was long gone by now, probably miles away. The bank's internal cameras hadn't been much help either. The robber had worn a mask and gloves, leaving no visible identifying marks. They'd been in and out quickly, minimizing their exposure to the cameras. It was a clean operation, frustratingly so. The only thing the bank cameras did capture clearly was the robber's bag. It was a simple duffel bag, black, and unremarkable. It could have belonged to anyone. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Johnson was sifting through reports of damaged vehicles, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was looking for anything that mentioned a cracked taillight, anything that might match the blurry image from the hardware store camera. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brody replayed the surveillance footage again, focusing on the taillight. He zoomed in as far as he could, trying to get a better look at the crack. It was a small crack, almost invisible, but it was there. A tiny imperfection on an otherwise ordinary car. He wondered how the crack had happened. Had the car been in an accident? Had someone backed into it in a parking lot? Every crack was different, a unique pattern of lines and fractures. If he could find a car with a matching crack, he'd have his robber. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. And Sheriff Brody wasn't about to give up. Not until he brought peace back to Harmony Creek. The blurriness of the surveillance footage was more than just an inconvenience, it was a wall. A thick, frustrating wall standing between Sheriff Brody and the robber. The car could have been a Ford, a Chevy, a Toyota, any make or model from the last 10 years, really. The shape was too distorted to make any reliable conclusions. Even the color was questionable. Was it black? Navy blue? A dark green, perhaps? The poor lighting and low resolution made it impossible to say for sure. They couldn't even narrow it down to a specific type of car. Was it a sedan? An SUV? A hatchback? The image offered no definitive answers. Sheriff Brody knew that without a clear picture of the car, tracking down the robber would be next to impossible. They couldn't issue an all-points bulletin with such vague information. They couldn't ask the public to be on the lookout for a blurry, dark-colored car. It was simply too broad, too general. The lack of clarity was maddening. It felt like the robber was deliberately taunting them, hiding behind a veil of pixelation. The technology that was supposed to help them solve the crime was, in this case, hindering their efforts. Deputy Johnson, still poring over the accident reports, let out a frustrated groan. "Sheriff," he said, "I've got dozens of reports here mentioning cracked taillights. But none of them give enough detail about the crack itself. They just say, cracked, or broken. It's not enough to make a comparison." Sheriff Brody understood his frustration. They needed more than just a mention of a cracked taillight. They needed a description, a photograph, something that would allow them to match the crack in the report to the crack in the blurry surveillance footage. He walked over to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. He wrote, "Cracked taillight," in big, bold letters. Underneath, he wrote, "Unique characteristics." "Okay, Johnson," he said, "we need to think outside the box. We need to find a way to get more information about these cracked taillights. Maybe we can contact the people who filed the reports and ask them for more details. Maybe we can check with local auto repair shops and see if they have any records of taillight repairs." He knew it was a long shot, but they had to try something. The blurry image of the getaway car was their only real lead, and the cracked taillight was their only hope of turning that blur into a clear path to the robber. He wouldn't let a little blurriness stop him from bringing justice to Harmony Creek. He just needed a little luck, and a lot of hard work. And maybe, just maybe, that cracked taillight would be the key to unlocking the whole case. Sheriff Brody wasn't just a sheriff, he was a detective at heart. He loved puzzles, and solving crimes was the ultimate puzzle. He thrived on the challenge of piecing together fragments of information, connecting seemingly unrelated clues, and ultimately, uncovering the truth. The blurry footage was a frustrating puzzle, no doubt, but Brody wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He saw the potential in that grainy image, the possibility of finding a hidden lead. He knew that somewhere in those pixels, there was a key to unlocking the mystery of the bank robbery. He spent hours poring over the footage, his eyes scanning every inch of the screen. He zoomed in, zoomed out, adjusted the brightness, and tweaked the contrast, all in an effort to find something, anything, that would give them an edge. He wasn't just looking, he was observing. He wasn't just seeing, he was noticing. He was paying attention to the smallest details, the subtle nuances that others might have missed. He was a detective, and that's what detectives did. Deputy Johnson, inspired by the sheriff's dedication, started making calls to the people who had filed the reports of damaged vehicles. He explained the situation, emphasizing the importance of even the smallest detail about the cracked taillights. Some people were dismissive, unwilling to take the time to help. Others were sympathetic but couldn't remember much about the damage. But a few were genuinely helpful, offering detailed descriptions and even digging up old photographs of their cars. One woman, Mrs. Henderson, remembered the exact circumstances of her cracked taillight. "It was a Tuesday," she said, "I was backing out of my driveway, and I accidentally bumped into my husband's truck. Cracked the taillight right good. I remember being so mad at myself." She even had a picture of the damage, taken with her phone shortly after the incident. Deputy Johnson asked her to send it to him, and he eagerly awaited its arrival. Sheriff Brody, meanwhile, had an idea. He decided to visit some of the local auto repair shops. He figured that even if people didn't report the damage to the police, they might have taken their cars to a mechanic for repairs. He started with Bob's Auto Repair, a small, family-owned shop on the outskirts of town. Bob, the owner, was a gruff but honest man who knew everything there was to know about cars. "Bob," Sheriff Brody said, "I'm investigating the bank robbery, and I'm trying to track down the getaway car. All I have is a blurry picture, but I think it might have had a cracked taillight. Have you seen any cars with cracked taillights lately?" Bob scratched his chin, thinking. "Cracked taillights, huh? Well, Sheriff, I see a lot of cars with cracked taillights. It's a common problem around here." Sheriff Brody sighed. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. But he wasn't about to give up. Not yet. He was a detective, and he had a job to do. He was determined to find that robber and bring peace back to Harmony Creek. The blurry footage, the cracked taillight, the phone calls, the auto repair shops, it was all part of the puzzle. And Sheriff Brody was determined to solve it. It wasn't just luck that led Sheriff Brody to the cracked taillight, it was his unwavering focus on detail. He'd spent hours studying the blurry footage, not just seeing the car as a whole, but examining each individual part. The way the light reflected off the bumper, the angle of the side mirror, the shape of the wheels, he noticed everything. Most people would have dismissed the footage as useless, too blurry to provide any meaningful information. But Brody refused to give up. He knew that even in the most chaotic scenes, there were always details that could provide clues. It was just a matter of finding them. And then he saw it. A small, dark line on the driver's side taillight. At first, he thought it was just a smudge on the camera lens. But as he zoomed in, he realized it was something more. It was a crack. A tiny imperfection on an otherwise ordinary car. A detail that most people wouldn't even notice. But to Sheriff Brody, it was a beacon of hope. It was a unique characteristic that could potentially identify the car and lead them to the robber. He knew that not all cracks were created equal. Each crack was different, a unique pattern of lines and fractures. Some were long and jagged, others were short and straight. Some were spider-webbed, others were clean breaks. He realized that if he could find another car with a matching crack, he'd have a solid lead. It was a long shot, but it was the best lead they had. And Brody wasn't about to let it go. Back at the sheriff's office, Deputy Johnson received the picture from Mrs. Henderson. He opened it up on his computer and examined it closely. The picture showed a cracked taillight on a red minivan. The crack was a long, jagged line that ran diagonally across the taillight. It wasn't a match. Deputy Johnson sighed, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over him. He had hoped that Mrs. Henderson's picture would be the key to solving the case. But it wasn't. He continued making calls, contacting more people who had reported damaged vehicles. He asked them about the details of the damage, hoping to find someone who could provide a description that matched the crack in the surveillance footage. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brody continued his rounds, visiting auto repair shops and asking about cracked taillights. He showed Bob, the owner of Bob's Auto Repair, a still image of the blurry footage, pointing out the cracked taillight. "Have you seen anything like this lately, Bob?" he asked. Bob squinted at the image, scratching his chin. He said, "I might have. I had a guy in here last week with a cracked taillight on a dark-colored sedan. I don't remember the exact details, but I think it was on the driver's side." Sheriff Brody's heart skipped a beat. A dark-colored sedan with a cracked taillight on the driver's side. It sounded promising. "Do you remember the guy's name, Bob?" he asked, his voice filled with anticipation. Bob thought for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I think it was Miller. John Miller." Sheriff Brody's eyes widened. John Miller. He knew that name. John Miller was a local man with a history of petty crime. He had been a suspect in several previous investigations, but they had never been able to gather enough evidence to charge him. Could John Miller be the bank robber? Sheriff Brody felt a surge of excitement. He was finally getting closer. The cracked taillight, the auto repair shop, the name, it was all starting to come together. He was determined to find John Miller and see if his car had a cracked taillight that matched the one in the blurry surveillance footage. He had a feeling that this could be the break they had been waiting for. Before the cracked taillight even came into the picture, Sheriff Brody and his team had already compiled a list of potential suspects. This wasn't solely based on hunches, it was the result of good, old-fashioned police work. They started by reviewing past bank robbery cases in neighboring counties, looking for any patterns or connections. They also examined the bank's security footage, paying close attention to the robber's movements, mannerisms, and any other identifying characteristics. They interviewed the bank tellers, asking them to describe the robber in as much detail as possible. They also talked to other local law enforcement agencies, seeking information about known criminals in the area. Based on this information, they created a list of individuals who fit the general profile of the robber. These were people with a history of financial problems, a tendency towards violence, or a known association with criminal activity. John Miller's name was already on that list. His past record of petty theft and his reputation as a troublemaker made him a person of interest in the case. But without any concrete evidence linking him to the robbery, they couldn't bring him in for questioning. Now, with the information from Bob at the auto repair shop, John Miller had moved to the top of the list. A dark-colored sedan with a cracked taillight on the driver's side, it was too much of a coincidence to ignore. Sheriff Brody decided it was time to pay John Miller a visit. He gathered a team of deputies and drove to Miller's house, a small, run-down bungalow on the edge of town. They approached the house cautiously, guns drawn. They didn't know what to expect, and they weren't taking any chances. Sheriff Brody knocked on the door. "John Miller," he shouted, "open up. This is the sheriff's department." A moment later, the door creaked open, and John Miller appeared, looking surprised and slightly disheveled. He was a thin man with a scraggly beard and shifty eyes. "What's going on, Sheriff?" he asked, his voice nervous. "I haven't done anything wrong. We just want to ask you a few questions, Mr. Miller," Sheriff Brody said calmly. "Can we come in?" Miller hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, allowing the deputies to enter the house. Sheriff Brody looked around the living room. It was cluttered and messy, with clothes strewn across the furniture and dirty dishes piled in the sink. It was clear that Miller wasn't living the high life. "Mr. Miller," Sheriff Brody said, "we're investigating the bank robbery that happened this morning. We have reason to believe that you may have been involved." Miller's eyes widened. "I didn't rob any bank, Sheriff," he protested. "I was home all day." "Is that so?" Sheriff Brody said, his voice skeptical. "Then you wouldn't mind if we took a look at your car, would you?" Miller's face paled. He knew he was in trouble. The cracked taillight. He had almost forgotten about it. "My car," he stammered. "What's wrong with my car?" "We just want to make sure it matches the description of the getaway car," Sheriff Brody said, his eyes fixed on Miller's. "Do you have a problem with that, Mr. Miller?" Miller knew he couldn't refuse. He had no choice but to cooperate. "Okay, Sheriff," he said, his voice defeated. "You can look at my car." Sheriff Brody smiled. He knew he had him. The cracked taillight had sealed the deal. Now, all he had to do was confirm it. And he had a feeling that it wouldn't take long. The net was closing in on John Miller, and Sheriff Brody was determined to bring him to justice. The people of Harmony Creek deserved nothing less. Sheriff Brody and his deputies followed John Miller out of the house and into the driveway. There, parked under a faded blue tarp, was a dark-colored sedan. It was a few years old, a bit rusty around the edges, but it generally matched the blurry description of the getaway car from the surveillance footage. It was dark blue, not black, but as Sheriff Brody knew, the color in the blurry footage was hard to determine with certainty. The make and model were still difficult to ascertain, but it was definitely a sedan, just like the car Bob at the auto repair shop had described. Sheriff Brody felt a surge of anticipation. This could be it. This could be the car that was used in the bank robbery. He just needed to confirm the cracked taillight. He approached the car cautiously, pulling back the blue tarp. There it was. The driver's side taillight. It was cracked. A thin, jagged line ran across the surface of the red plastic. It was definitely a crack, not just a scratch or a smudge. Sheriff Brody leaned in closer, examining the crack more carefully. He compared it to the image he had in his mind, the image he had studied so intently for hours. The blurry image from the surveillance footage. The crack on Miller's taillight was similar, but it was hard to tell if it was an exact match. The image was too blurry, the details too indistinct. He needed to get a closer look, a more detailed comparison. He needed to take pictures, measurements, anything that would help him determine if the crack on Miller's taillight was the same crack that was captured in the surveillance footage. He turned to one of his deputies. "Johnson," he said, "get the camera. I want you to take pictures of this taillight. Get close-ups, different angles, everything you can." Deputy Johnson nodded and grabbed the camera from the patrol car. He started snapping pictures of the taillight, following Sheriff Brody's instructions. Sheriff Brody, meanwhile, continued to examine the car. He looked for any other signs that it might have been used in the robbery. He checked the tires for mud or dirt, he looked for scratches or dents, he searched for anything that might be out of the ordinary. He also looked inside the car. He peered through the windows, trying to get a glimpse of the interior. He saw a few empty soda cans, some fast food wrappers, and a pile of old newspapers. Nothing that immediately stood out. He knew that finding concrete evidence inside the car would be a long shot. The robber would have likely cleaned up any traces of the crime. But the cracked taillight was the key. That was what had led them to John Miller, and that was what would ultimately determine his guilt or innocence. Sheriff Brody just needed to prove that the crack on Miller's taillight matched the crack in the blurry surveillance footage. And he wasn't about to give up until he had done everything he could to make that happen. He owed it to the people of Harmony Creek. He owed it to himself. He was a detective, and he had a puzzle to solve. And he was determined to solve it, no matter what it took. The discovery of the cracked taillight on John Miller's car was a pivotal moment in the investigation. It was the culmination of Sheriff Brody's meticulous detective work, his unwavering focus on detail, and his refusal to give up, even when faced with a frustratingly blurry image. Now, the real work began. The task of comparing the crack on Miller's taillight with the crack in the surveillance footage. It was a delicate process, requiring patience, precision, and a keen eye for detail. Back at the sheriff's office, Sheriff Brody and Deputy Johnson set up a makeshift lab. They used a high-resolution computer monitor to display the pictures of Miller's taillight, side by side with a still image from the surveillance footage. They zoomed in on the cracks, examining their shapes, their lengths, and their angles. They looked for any unique characteristics, any distinguishing features that would confirm or deny a match. It was like comparing two snowflakes, each one unique and intricate. The challenge was to determine if they were similar enough to be considered the same. Sheriff Brody used a magnifying glass to examine the cracks more closely. He traced their outlines with his finger, feeling the subtle ridges and grooves. He noticed that the crack on Miller's taillight had a small branch, a tiny offshoot that extended to the left. He went back to the surveillance footage and zoomed in on the crack. He squinted, trying to see if he could detect a similar branch. It was there. Faint, almost invisible, but it was there. A tiny branch extending to the left, just like on Miller's taillight. Sheriff Brody's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the confirmation he had been waiting for. He called Deputy Johnson over to take a look. "Johnson," he said, "do you see that branch on the crack? The one that extends to the left." Deputy Johnson leaned in and examined the image closely. "Yeah, Sheriff," he said, "I see it." "Now look at the picture of Miller's taillight," Sheriff Brody said. "Do you see a similar branch?" Deputy Johnson studied the picture for a moment. "Yeah, Sheriff," he said, "it's there too. It's an exact match." Sheriff Brody smiled. "That's all I needed to know," he said. "We've got our man." He knew that this wasn't definitive proof. They still needed to gather more evidence, to build a solid case against John Miller. But the matching cracked taillight was a significant breakthrough. It was the key piece of the puzzle that had finally fallen into place. He picked up the phone and called the district attorney. "I think we've got enough to bring him in," he said. "I want a warrant for John Miller's arrest." The district attorney agreed. He knew that the matching cracked taillight was a strong piece of evidence. He authorized the warrant, and Sheriff Brody and his team prepared to bring John Miller in for questioning. The people of Harmony Creek could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The robber was about to be brought to justice. And it was all thanks to a cracked taillight and a detective who knew how to focus on the details. The matching crack wasn't just a lucky break, it was a testament to the power of observation and the importance of forensic science. While Sheriff Brody and Deputy Johnson were confident in their initial assessment, they knew they needed to take the evidence to the next level. They contacted the State Crime Lab, requesting the assistance of forensic experts to analyze the taillight and the surveillance footage. They needed a professional opinion, a scientific confirmation that the crack patterns were indeed a match. The experts arrived the next day, equipped with sophisticated equipment and years of experience in forensic analysis. They meticulously examined the taillight, using specialized tools to measure the angles, depths, and widths of the cracks. They also enhanced the surveillance footage, using advanced software to sharpen the image and reveal hidden details. They compared the two sets of data, looking for similarities and differences. It was a painstaking process, but the experts were thorough and methodical. They understood the importance of their work, the potential impact on the lives of the people of Harmony Creek. After several hours of analysis, the experts emerged with their findings. "Sheriff," the lead forensic scientist said, "we have completed our analysis of the taillight and the surveillance footage." Sheriff Brody held his breath, waiting for the verdict. "Our findings indicate that the crack patterns on the taillight and in the surveillance footage are consistent with each other," the scientist said. "In our professional opinion, it is highly likely that the crack on the suspect's taillight is the same crack that was captured in the surveillance footage." Sheriff Brody felt a wave of relief wash over him. The experts had confirmed his suspicions. The matching crack wasn't just a coincidence, it was a solid piece of forensic evidence. "Thank you," he said to the scientists. "Your expertise has been invaluable." With the forensic evidence in hand, Sheriff Brody and his team were ready to bring John Miller in for questioning. They arrived at Miller's house and placed him under arrest. Miller didn't resist. He knew he was caught. The matching cracked taillight was the evidence that sealed his fate. Back at the sheriff's office, Miller was read his rights and questioned about the bank robbery. At first, he denied any involvement. But as the evidence mounted, he began to crack. He was shown the surveillance footage, the pictures of his taillight, and the forensic report. He realized that there was no way out. Finally, he confessed. He admitted to robbing the bank, explaining that he was desperate for money to pay off his gambling debts. The people of Harmony Creek were overjoyed when they heard the news. The robber had been caught, and the stolen money had been recovered. The town could finally return to normal. Sheriff Brody was hailed as a hero. He had solved the case, not with flashy technology or elaborate schemes, but with good, old-fashioned detective work and a keen eye for detail. And it was all thanks to a cracked taillight. A tiny imperfection that had ultimately led to the capture of a bank robber and the restoration of peace and security to the town of Harmony Creek. It was a reminder that even the smallest details can be significant, and that even the blurriest images can hold the key to solving a crime. The cracked taillight had sealed the deal. Justice had been served. Even with John Miller in custody and a confession on record, the case wasn't entirely closed. The district attorney wanted to ensure they had an airtight case, one that would stand up to scrutiny in court. The matching cracked taillight was compelling evidence, but it needed to be presented in a clear and convincing manner. That's where the forensic experts came in again. They were tasked with preparing a detailed report, outlining their methodology, their findings, and their conclusions. They needed to explain, in layman's terms, how they had determined that the crack patterns were a match. They created a series of exhibits, including enlarged photographs of the taillight and the surveillance footage, as well as diagrams illustrating the key features of the cracks. They also prepared a computer simulation, showing how the cracks would align if the two images were superimposed. The experts were meticulous in their preparation, anticipating any potential challenges from the defense. They knew that Miller's lawyer would likely try to discredit the evidence, to cast doubt on the reliability of the forensic analysis. They were ready for him. The trial began a few weeks later. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. The people of Harmony Creek were eager to see justice served. The prosecution presented their case, calling witnesses to testify about the bank robbery, the surveillance footage, and the cracked taillight. Sheriff Brody took the stand, recounting his investigation and explaining how he had identified John Miller as a suspect. The forensic experts testified about their analysis of the taillight and the surveillance footage. They presented their exhibits, explaining in detail how they had determined that the crack patterns were a match. The defense lawyer tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case, questioning the reliability of the surveillance footage and the accuracy of the forensic analysis. He argued that the matching crack was just a coincidence, that there was no way to be certain that it was the same crack. But the forensic experts stood their ground, calmly and confidently defending their findings. They explained the scientific principles behind their analysis, emphasizing the rigor and objectivity of their methodology. They were able to convince the jury that the matching cracked taillight was a strong piece of evidence, one that pointed directly to John Miller's guilt. The jury deliberated for several hours before reaching a verdict. They found John Miller guilty of bank robbery. The people of Harmony Creek erupted in applause. Justice had been served. Sheriff Brody was relieved. He had worked tirelessly to solve the case, and he was grateful that the jury had recognized the importance of the evidence. He knew that the forensic experts had played a crucial role in securing the conviction. Their expertise and their professionalism had been instrumental in bringing John Miller to justice. The blurry footage and the cracked taillight had seemed like insurmountable obstacles at first, but with the help of forensic science, they had been able to overcome those challenges and solve the case. The cracked taillight had sealed the deal, not just in the investigation, but also in the courtroom. Harmony Creek was safe once again. The impact of the forensic experts' confirmation cannot be overstated. It transformed the investigation from a hunch based on circumstantial evidence into a solid case built on scientific fact. It wasn't just Sheriff Brody's gut feeling or Deputy Johnson's diligent work, it was a validated, objective assessment that held significant weight in the eyes of the law. This confirmation served as the bedrock upon which the prosecution built their case. It gave them the confidence to pursue the charges against John Miller, knowing that they had a strong piece of evidence that was difficult to refute. The experts' analysis provided a level of certainty that would have been impossible to achieve otherwise. Without their confirmation, the matching crack could have been dismissed as a coincidence, a lucky break that didn't necessarily prove guilt. But with their scientific validation, the matching crack became a powerful symbol of truth, a clear and undeniable link between John Miller and the bank robbery. The confirmation also had a profound impact on the people of Harmony Creek. It gave them a sense of closure, a feeling that justice had been served in a fair and impartial manner. They knew that Miller wasn't just being accused based on suspicion, he was being held accountable for his actions based on concrete evidence. The news of the forensic confirmation spread quickly throughout the town, bringing a renewed sense of hope and optimism. People started to feel safe again, knowing that the robber had been caught and that the stolen money had been recovered. The businesses reopened, the children returned to playing in the streets, and the doors were once again left unlocked. Harmony Creek was slowly but surely returning to its peaceful and carefree state. The cracked taillight, once a blurry and insignificant detail, had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest clues can lead to the truth. Sheriff Brody was proud of his team, grateful for the assistance of the forensic experts, and thankful for the support of the community. He had worked hard to solve the case, and he was gratified to see that his efforts had paid off. He knew that the trial would be challenging, but he was confident that the evidence would speak for itself. He was determined to see John Miller brought to justice, not just for the sake of the bank, but for the sake of the people of Harmony Creek. They deserved to feel safe, and they deserved to know that their town was protected. The confirmation of the matching cracked taillight was a crucial step in achieving that goal. It was a strong piece of evidence, a symbol of truth, and a beacon of hope for the future of Harmony Creek. The cracked taillight had indeed sealed the deal. With the arrest warrant secured and the forensic evidence in hand, Sheriff Brody and his team moved swiftly to apprehend John Miller. They arrived at his residence early in the morning, catching him by surprise. The arrest itself was uneventful. Miller, seemingly resigned to his fate, offered no resistance. He was read his rights, handcuffed, and escorted to the patrol car. News of the arrest spread like wildfire through Harmony Creek. The town erupted in cheers, a collective sigh of relief washing over the community. The fear and uncertainty that had gripped them since the bank robbery began to dissipate. While the matching cracked taillight was a significant piece of evidence, it wasn't the only factor that led to Miller's arrest. Other pieces of information, gathered through diligent police work, also played a role. The bank tellers had provided descriptions of the robber that generally matched Miller's appearance. His history of petty crime and financial difficulties made him a person of interest from the start. And his presence at Bob's Auto Repair, seeking a quick and discreet repair for his cracked taillight, raised further suspicion. All of these factors, combined with the forensic confirmation of the matching crack, created a compelling case against John Miller. Back at the sheriff's office, Miller was booked and processed. He was given the opportunity to make a phone call, but he declined. He seemed to be lost in thought, perhaps contemplating the consequences of his actions. The stolen money was recovered from Miller's house, hidden in a shoebox under his bed. This provided further evidence of his guilt and solidified the case against him. Sheriff Brody addressed the townspeople at a press conference, assuring them that justice would be served. He praised his team for their hard work and dedication, and he thanked the community for their support. He emphasized that the arrest of John Miller was a victory for the entire town, a reminder that crime would not be tolerated in Harmony Creek. The arrest brought a sense of closure to the community, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter. The trial loomed on the horizon, a process that would require patience, perseverance, and a continued commitment to justice. Sheriff Brody was prepared for the challenges ahead. He knew that the defense lawyer would do everything in his power to discredit the evidence and cast doubt on Miller's guilt. But Sheriff Brody was confident in the strength of the case. He knew that the forensic evidence was solid, the witness testimony was credible, and the community was united in its desire for justice. He was determined to see John Miller brought to justice, to ensure that he paid the price for his crime, and to restore peace and security to the town of Harmony Creek. The arrest was a major milestone, but it was just the beginning of the end. The cracked taillight had led them to the suspect, and now it was time to let the legal process run its course. Harmony Creek awaited the trial. The trial of John Miller was the biggest event in Harmony Creek in decades. The small courtroom was packed every day, with residents eager to witness the proceedings and see justice served. The prosecution built their case around the matching cracked taillight, presenting it as the key piece of evidence that linked Miller to the bank robbery. They called Sheriff Brody to the stand, who testified about his investigation and how he had identified Miller as a suspect. Deputy Johnson testified about taking the photos of Miller's taillight and the process of comparing them to the surveillance footage. He explained how he and Sheriff Brody had noticed the unique branch on the crack, which ultimately led to the forensic confirmation. The forensic experts took the stand, presenting their detailed report and explaining their methodology. They showed the jury the enlarged photographs, the diagrams, and the computer simulation, all designed to illustrate the matching crack patterns. The defense lawyer, a seasoned attorney from out of town, tried to discredit the evidence, arguing that the surveillance footage was too blurry to be reliable and that the forensic analysis was flawed. He suggested that the matching crack could have been a coincidence, that there was no way to be absolutely certain that it was the same crack. He called his own expert witnesses, who testified that the forensic methods used by the prosecution were not foolproof and that there was a margin of error involved. The trial became a battle of experts, with each side presenting their own interpretation of the evidence. The jury, composed of ordinary citizens from Harmony Creek, had the difficult task of sorting through the conflicting testimony and deciding which side was more credible. The prosecution emphasized the importance of the cracked taillight, arguing that it was a unique identifier that could not be explained away as a coincidence. They pointed out that Miller had a history of petty crime, that he was in financial trouble, and that he had tried to hide his cracked taillight by parking his car under a tarp. They argued that all of these factors, combined with the forensic evidence, painted a clear picture of Miller's guilt. The defense lawyer argued that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and conjecture, that there was no direct evidence linking Miller to the bank robbery, and that the cracked taillight was simply a red herring. He urged the jury to consider the possibility that Miller was innocent, that he was being wrongly accused based on flimsy evidence. The closing arguments were impassioned and persuasive, with each side making a final appeal to the jury. The fate of John Miller, and the peace of mind of Harmony Creek, rested in their hands. The cracked taillight had taken center stage, a tiny imperfection that held the weight of justice. The people of Harmony Creek held their breath, waiting for the verdict. The trial had been long and arduous, but the end was finally in sight. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces somber and unreadable. A hush fell over the crowd as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. In the matter of the state versus John Miller, he began, his voice clear and steady, on the charge of bank robbery, we the jury find the defendant. He paused, drawing out the suspense. The people of Harmony Creek held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. Guilty. A collective cheer erupted in the courtroom, a wave of relief washing over the crowd. Justice had been served. John Miller sat motionless, his face betraying no emotion. He had known all along that he was caught, that the evidence against him was overwhelming. The matching cracked taillight, the forensic confirmation, the stolen money, the witness testimony, it all added up to a clear and undeniable picture of his guilt. Sheriff Brody allowed himself a small smile. He had done his job, he had brought the robber to justice, and he had restored peace and security to the town of Harmony Creek. He knew that the trial had been difficult, that the defense lawyer had put up a strong fight. But in the end, the evidence had prevailed. The cracked taillight, that tiny imperfection on an otherwise ordinary car, had been the key to solving the case. The judge sentenced John Miller to a lengthy prison term, ensuring that he would not be able to harm the community again. As Miller was led away in handcuffs, Sheriff Brody addressed the townspeople outside the courthouse. Today is a day of celebration, he said. Today, justice has been served. Today, Harmony Creek can finally heal. He praised his team for their hard work and dedication, and he thanked the community for their unwavering support. He emphasized that the case had been a reminder of the importance of vigilance, of attention to detail, and of the power of community. The cracked taillight, he said, was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest clues can lead to the truth. The people of Harmony Creek cheered, their voices filled with gratitude and relief. They knew that they had been through a difficult time, but they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. The town began to return to normal. The businesses thrived, the children played in the streets, and the doors were once again left unlocked. Harmony Creek was once again a peaceful and carefree community. Sheriff Brody continued to serve as the town's protector, always vigilant, always ready to respond to any threat. He knew that his job was not always easy, but he was committed to serving the people of Harmony Creek. He would never forget the case of the bank robbery and the cracked taillight. It was a reminder that even the smallest details can be significant, and that even the blurriest images can hold the key to solving a crime. The cracked taillight had sealed the deal, not just for John Miller, but for the entire town of Harmony Creek. Justice had been served, and peace had been restored. The cracked taillight would forever be a part of Harmony Creek history. The story of the bank robbery in Harmony Creek serves as a powerful reminder that in the pursuit of justice, no detail is too small, no clue too insignificant. What initially seemed like a dead end, a blurry surveillance image offering little more than a vague outline, ultimately led to the capture and conviction of a criminal, all thanks to a cracked taillight. It highlights the importance of meticulous police work, the dedication of law enforcement officers who are willing to go the extra mile to solve a case. Sheriff Brody's unwavering focus on detail, his refusal to dismiss the blurry footage as useless, and his willingness to pursue every lead, no matter how improbable, were instrumental in bringing John Miller to justice. The story also underscores the vital role of forensic science in modern criminal investigations. The expertise of the forensic experts, their ability to analyze the evidence and provide objective confirmation of the matching crack patterns, was crucial in securing the conviction. But perhaps the most important takeaway from the story is the power of community. The people of Harmony Creek, united in their desire for justice, provided unwavering support to Sheriff Brody and his team. They shared information, offered assistance, and stood together in the face of adversity. The cracked taillight became a symbol of hope for Harmony Creek, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, justice can prevail. It was a testament to the power of observation, the importance of forensic science, and the strength of community. The story of the cracked taillight is a reminder that even the smallest details can have a significant impact, that even the blurriest images can hold the key to solving a crime. It is a story of dedication, perseverance, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. Years later, the story of the bank robbery and the cracked taillight became a local legend in Harmony Creek, a tale told and retold, passed down from one generation to the next. It was a reminder that even a small town can be the scene of great drama and that even the most ordinary people can be heroes. And so, the cracked taillight, that tiny imperfection on an otherwise ordinary car, became forever etched in the history of Harmony Creek, a symbol of justice served and peace restored. The cracked taillight had sealed the deal, not just for John Miller, but for the entire town, proving that even the smallest detail can make the biggest difference. And that is the moral of the story. The end.